Hi, wishing y'all well! I've been wanting to make this video for a while, and Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2 has made it relevant in a fun new way. We already see in the first trailer that items will return, but a lot of you may not be ready for these. For people familiar and unfamiliar, I want to talk about the items of the first game as a fun time capsule, and because we're probably going to see some of these again. The items in Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl are probably the most fun I've had with items in a platform fighter. Each one is silly and funny, but how do they rank? What's the most useful? What's the most reliable? What are the worst? And what are the best? I don't know. Who can say for sure, but here's what I think in order from what I guess are the weakest to what I guess are the strongest. While results can of course vary, I do believe generally, typically, the most inconsequential item in the game right now is the log from Blammo. It bounces around slightly, interrupting anyone nearby, including whoever threw or hit it. It usually leaves as quick as it came, hits maybe once, keeps going on ahead, and people hit by it can usually shake it off and get back to doing something else. It's interesting that sometimes it can carry fighters like a moving platform, but yeah, it's easy enough to avoid, and even if you don't, it's just usually not that big a deal. And in terms of items, I think it's probably the smallest deal in the game. In the same tier, maybe this is early, but for as cool as it is, I do think the Irken chip summoning a ship to shoot some lasers is kinda weak. Throwing the chip itself has no effect on opponents, and when it lands, there's enough time to get prepared. You know a ship is coming from the left. It'll shoot a few lasers around where the chip was dropped, and then do nothing as it finishes flying across the screen, the ship itself having no hitbox. Each laser does 10% of damage, and the hits can go together, but this item's as low as it is because even that's not guaranteed. It's a sloppy sweep, not meant to combo anyone specifically, but all this startup for that percent? It definitely varies by stage size, but even on the smallest stages, it allows opponents plenty of time to prepare. It's just usually not that difficult to avoid. On larger stages, you can really see how little area it covers and how much more time it takes for the ship to leave. You could try to predict and punish if an opponent's gonna try to jump around it or just block it, but I don't think it lasts long enough or pressures opponents enough to force any specific option that's gonna be significantly easier to predict. Also, it's been patched, so this isn't any sort of like practical knowledge, but fun fact, the ship used to get stuck on the side of Rocco's house on the hardcore chore stage. Nothing to do with its current reliability, usefulness, or ranking, just a bit of trivia. It's pretty funny, but yeah, in Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2, I think I'd like to see the ship have a hitbox, but as long as we're talking about the first game, this is a fun but pretty weak item. The next item in this ranking is probably the trash can. It's pretty similar to the log from Blammo without the whole being a platform sometimes stuff, and people can pretty easily shake it off and get back into the fight after getting hit by this. Typically, the can also leaves behind 3 goops, like a Blina's goop, that pops people up. This is pretty inconsequential and easy to avoid on larger stages, but on popular stages like Jellyfish Fields or the Royal Wood Cemetery, I think it's something players want to be aware of, but only for a little bit. It's pretty fun to combo off the goop if you can manage it. Fighters can get spiked back into the goop repeatedly for a bit, or get hit by Reptar's beefy tail. But at the end of the day, the trash can's this low because the goop really doesn't last that long. It goes away surprisingly fast. Also, players that play with items may not even know that the can, if left to roll for a while, can drop extra goop. I only found out about this recently, and being a feature I've so rarely even seen, it just adds to how inconsequential features of this item can be. All this being said, the can and its trash can also hurt the player that activated them. So ultimately, the trash can is a fun item that can lead to sweet combos and KOs, but more often than not, it's either gonna bother everyone for a little bit, or maybe not even really do anything. Next up, I'd put the Reptar car. I love this item, but it's not that helpful. This is another one where regardless of whoever activates it, it can hurt anybody. But different than the log or trash can, the Reptar car will turn when it senses the end of a platform, senses an item, or hits someone. So it drives back and forth, demanding more attempts to avoid it, especially on stages with more limited platforms, instead of how the log or trash can usually demand just one jump to avoid them. The Reptar car can also be hit to change the direction of its drive, and if hit hard enough, it can get some air with its hitbox still active. If someone really doesn't want to deal with a Reptar car, they can time a grab and throw it off stage, but they better time it right, or else they, take a dinky little hit. All in all, this is an item that tends to get in everyone's way a bit for a while, making it, I guess, a pretty alright item overall. After that, I'd place the Suck-O-Matic. Pulling opponents to one spot definitely seems beneficial. And it can be. They could be stuck right next to an unblockable explosion or grabbed and thrown over and over. But people fighting the current aren't so helpless. In fact, left alone, it's actually really easy to get away from. You can just wave dash, or maybe use your up special if you want to escape this item's pull. Players getting pulled in can also still block, parry, maybe even trade attacks, win rock, paper, scissors interactions, and maybe even use the items pulled in next to them. But when this item works, it can really work. It doesn't affect the player that activated it, so it's fun to ready yourself as you maybe see the item also pull in Tommy Balls or explosive pies for your opponent to try and deal with. It's also important to note that this item can actually be destroyed after just a few hits. It can even get destroyed by some of the other items it pulls in, so that really limits its value. Depending on what else is around, the Succomatic can be pretty dangerous. I think this all balances out to not being a bad item. It sets opponents up for either nothing, or maybe something devastating. The highs are higher and the lows are as low as it gets. You can definitely just wave dash out of this. It's not going to take care of the opponent for you, unless something specific happens, like maybe using it on a platform moving off stage. This is a fun and interesting item, but its results are too much of a mixed bag, but not even enough to be described as like 50-50. It's more like 20-80 shots of something really good happening. I think this is usually not going to do anything, so without being super useful or reliable, I think this is a good spot for the Succomatic. Lastly for this tier, I'd put the Krabby Patty. It's the only healing item, and it heals a nice chunk of 50%. And that's not the biggest deal, as it's not that hard to deal another 50% in Nickelodeon Brawl, especially if you're playing with items. But this is by no means a bad item. There's a guaranteed beneficial effect, and this could definitely help you survive the next hit or combo. Or you could also get spiked or edgehogged all the same. Guaranteed healing is plenty alright, there just isn't much to it, and maybe the Krabby Patty isn't as much of a potential game changer as most of the other items. Alright, at the bottom of the next tier of items, I've got the Tommy Ball. When thrown, the Tommy Ball will go ahead and float somewhere on stage, and for a while, whoever touches it will be bounced away. Not only is this just fun, but it's not unlikely that if someone can reach this item, it's because they're on stage and maybe their opponent isn't yet. In a situation like that, you could throw this toward a ledge and make a potentially tricky situation for opponents, guarding the ledge while your fighter is available to do whatever else, like guard the edge more with your own moves, or prepare for opponents to roll on stage since they can't really do most other ledge options. And that's not always going to be the case. Sometimes this ball may turn out to be completely inconsequential, but I think this is usually going to have some interesting impact. It's more often than not going to stop someone from getting an item, it's going to push someone off stage, and it's also funny that it can rock, paper, scissors people and reflect stuff too. Just above that, I'd place the explosive pies. This is a solid item. The pies get placed somewhere and explode in contact with whatever and whoever touches them, including the player that placed them. Once it's placed somewhere, that's it. That area is dangerous, and whoever uses the item gets to decide on that placement. It's a one-time use and only hits on the ground, but it hits hard. That's sort of all there is to it. It's a simple but solidly good item. And for the top of this tier, Arnold's Boombox. So this thing also blows up, but this one's gonna blow up bigger than anything else. It's really strong. So strong you can't even block it. You can't block the pie either, but someone has to push you into the pie. The boombox you can't even be next to. And it detonates after a certain amount of time, so it's not sticking around as long as the pie, but it can hit in the air too, can be re-grabbed to really decide where it should go instead of being strictly stationary, and look at this hitbox! This does 50%, so even if it doesn't knock you out, it's doing some chunky damage. So, because of its strength and flexibility, the boombox goes above the explosive pie. I also learned while making this that the boombox has hitboxes when you throw it up or down, which could help you combo into its other hits. For the first item I think is actually really nice, we've got Sandy's Rocket. This is a nice projectile that simply hits good once, and may just miss. But that's up to you, because this item's extra generous. Even if your aim is a bit off, Sandy's Rocket is forgiving by actually curving a fair amount to help catch opponents. Opponents can try to grab it as it heads for them if they're cool, but that timing's pretty tight, so it's probably usually less risky to just try to dodge it. All in all, it's a pretty nice item, and it's also the last item to potentially hurt whoever activates it, hurting players that are too close when it hurts someone else. Every item after this one will have no negative effect on whoever uses it. Next up, I do think the Anchor is even better than Sandy's Rocket. The Anchor doesn't go as far, but hits super hard, and you get multiple chances to throw this thing around. I love scaring people as I throw and rethrow and rethrow and rethrow this big threatening anchor. And throwing it against someone's recovery? Forget it, you're done. Again, opponents can sometimes try to grab this too, but it's so quick and strong and comes from above that that risk rarely, if ever, is worth going for. With a big strong hitbox and multiple chances, the Anchor is simply a really nice item. Then we've got the Jellyfish Jelly. So how this one works is you're gonna throw it and it's gonna spawn 5 jellyfish that float together for a bit and zap any opponents that get too close. They do little zaps, which maybe after 2 hard-hitting items is kind of weird to hear, but the thing is that they last a good amount of time and they cover a good amount of space. And since the jellyfish won't zap the player that summoned them, that player doesn't have to worry about being careful. They can walk up and throw an opponent into the jellyfish if they want. Players are free to jump through the jellyfish for better positioning, and the jellyfish may even juggle opponents for a while, teeing players up to swing with whatever follow-up they want. The jellyfish are avoidable, they're not ridiculous, but they are more often than not pretty helpful, and as an item are really, really nice. And I love their happy little dance as they say goodbye, so cute. Oh, also, it's super cool that there's a rare chance you may see a blue jellyfish too. Lastly for this tier, there's Sokka's Boomerang. When thrown, Sokka's Boomerang will fly in interesting patterns, hitting everyone who didn't throw it, and will make sure to loop back to where it was thrown, convenient for players that want to re-grab it and throw it again. Each time it is rethrown by someone, it gets stronger, and you can tell what level of strength it's gone up to by what color its trail has become. A white trail signifies the first throw, a green trail signifies a stronger second throw, and the boomerang will have a purple trail after 3 throws, showing it's as strong as it can get. There is some more time relatively for opponents to grab this and use it instead, and players also might miss re-grab strengthening the boomerang in the quick chaos that can happen in this game. However, this item also has some tech that's not too hard to do, where you throw and quickly re-grab the boomerang, instantly powering it up. Mitigating risk and near instantly speeding up this item and having it hit people hard, like really hard, is very impressive. It can knock people out pretty early. But yes, there's some counterplay, and players may not have time to power up the boomerang in the chaos of a match, but this is an item with big reward and honestly not that much risk, making it really, really nice. Finally, in our last tier, we have some items that are truly just ridiculously good. The counterplay is minimal, the downsides are non-existent, and first up is the Fenton Thermos. A player throws this and everyone else will get hit by a bunch of ghosts that fly out for a while. This is a fantastic item. There's no counterplay besides trying to avoid the ghosts. You can't hit them, you can't grab them, and the player that summons them is completely immune to them. The ghosts are pretty strong too, so opponents really have to be careful. I've had some opponents mash on respawn and get instantly caught again and knocked out at like 0. Opponents can do a good job being careful to minimize the impact of this item, especially on larger stages, but this is for sure one of the most ridiculously good items in the game. It's also amazing to let these ghosts loose in Rocco's house on the hardcore chores stage, as they won't go through the ceiling. The ghosts will bunch up and eventually despawn, but seeing them crowd around and pushing opponents into that mess is some good fun. Even better than that though, in honest arguable contention for the best item in the game, there is Squidward's Clarinet. When a player picks up this clarinet, it'll start playing a song that shoots out a bunch of notes. These notes do good knockback based on where opponents touch the bubble. They do 20 or 30% each, they float in varying patterns that cover good space by default, and there's a good amount of them. Players are fully free to move around and jump like when carrying opponents, so you can cover more distance or focus a barrage of shots. Using strafing with this item gives players even more control in aiming this, making sure you're facing the right way and keeping up the pressure. So what's the counterplay? Well, opponents can't reflect or even grab these notes. Their best bet really is to just try and avoid this. But unlike the jellyfish or ghosts, the player is in control of where to aim this item, making avoiding it less predictable or easy. More specific space can be covered and focused. Opponents can try to hit the notes to save themselves, but this is pretty specific and only seems to work with some characters. I've seen SpongeBob get away with this by using his net, but characters without disjointed moves are pretty much doomed, and some characters like April can get hit in unfavorable trades even with her huge disjoints. It is not uncommon to see Squidward's Clarinet combo people from 0 to death all on its own. This is a ridiculously good item, and I wouldn't blame anyone for thinking it's the best item in the game. Thank goodness Squidward himself doesn't play it quite as well as everyone else seems to be able to. But I do think there is one item left that's even more ridiculous than this. Alright, so I think Zim's Gardenome is the best item in the game. For those unfamiliar, here's what it does. You throw it, and it tethers to you. It's attached. You move around, and it comes with you with this electricity between you both. This electricity hits opponents a bit, and after a while, the gnome goes away. Pretty neat, right? A fine item so far. Well, here's something interesting about this. See how it's flashing? That's how you know it's going away soon. But check this out. You can re-grab your gnome whenever you want, toss it, and it's actually as good as new. This is a constant hitbox that you can just kinda start over pretty much whenever you want. This is fantastic. This constant electricity can interrupt approaches, can mess with opponents' recoveries, can combo into free hits, sometimes you can even ladder people with it. I've had great fun taking people to the sky by combining this item with Hugh's Pogo Stick or Nigel's Up Special. And all those benefits you can just start over when you have a free second. I've had matches where I just re-grab the gnome and keep it around for like more than half the entire match, and I wasn't even trying. You could totally keep it around for the whole round if you wanted to. One argument I could understand though for Squidward's Clarinet being the best over this though is that there is some more clear counterplay. Players can re-grab their gnomes whenever, but opponents can also grab players' gnomes and attach them to themselves themselves if players aren't careful enough. This seems like a tough chance to come by when the electricity is so close to the gnome and players might be air dashing around chaotically, but it can definitely happen. Players can then try to re-grab the gnome to get it back, but it's either that or just trying to hit the opponent. Running away and waiting isn't a viable counterplay option this time when people can just refresh the gnome and start it over. At least the notes in Squidward's clarinet run out. At least the jellyfish go away eventually. But this gnome could actually stick around for maybe the entire round. And on top of all that, here's another fun fact about it. Even if someone knocks someone with a gnome out, that still might not be enough to get rid of this thing. It usually is, most of the time sure, but one night before bed I was just messing around fighting computers when I got blasted by Arnold's boombox and saw I came back with my gnome still attached. I did a bit of testing and saw that this happened consistently with Arnold's boombox, and saw this also happened when knocked out by explosive pies. I guess there's just something about these explosions that keeps players' gnomes around. But then I fought Mauve and she respawned with her gnome still attached without any explosion, so forget what I said, I guess it just comes back sometimes because it's amazing, I don't know. I don't fully get it, but this just adds to the absolute ridiculousness that this item already had, and I think with everything together, Zim's gnome is probably the best item in Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl. Well, what do you think? Are you convinced, or is Squidward's clarinet better, or even something else? Do you think I underrated something? Do you think I overrated something? Did I forget an interesting fun fact? Either way, hopefully I made my points clear and concise, and hopefully this was a fun thing to watch. These items are sure to change a bit in Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2, as even the way we carry them may be more like Smash and trapping people in a box, kinda like the Space Stone from Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. Ooh, Sandy's Knockout Ray could be fun! Just shoot someone to put them in their shield break animation. Do y'all have any item ideas? Feel free as always to chat in the comments, and yeah, wish y'all well, and I'll see y'all later. Bye!